And next up, it's me, the host of Axios Today, Nyla Boodoo. Good morning. I'm so honored to be with you guys this morning for our event, The State of Play for Small Businesses. We're going to be looking at the regulatory framework for what is and isn't working for small businesses across the country today. And you can join our conversation by using the hashtag Axios Events. Our first guest has been in President Biden's cabinet since March 2021. She's at the helm of the Small Business Administration, which helps small business owners flourish and get the support they need during times of economic duress. Without further ado, please welcome SBA Administrator Isabel Casillas-Guzman. Welcome, Administrator. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Of course. Good morning, everyone.
So, my boss, Axios CEO Jim Vandehei, recently said that this is the weirdest economic time he's ever experienced in his 16 years or so of running companies. And I think the fact of the matter is a lot of small businesses really have no idea of where the economic winds are headed right now. So what is your primary message to small business owners?
Well, for sure that there's been extreme uncertainty. I think that what's important to note, though, from an overall perspective, we've had a historic economic recovery. 10.5 million people applied to start a business in the last 2 years. That's a record high, 84% higher than historical averages. That's a lot of hope, as the president says, with each application that's filed. In addition, we've created 12.4 million new jobs in the past couple of years, and small businesses are a part of that. They're the ones who create 2/3 of net new jobs. And now more than ever, as they are challenged with uncertainty, it's important that we have these great government programs that can help them in their pathways to start and grow their businesses, focusing on revenue growth and making sure that you have strong relationships with your customers and your vendors is so critical right now. And the SBA's formula is about trying to make sure small businesses tap into the growth opportunities of the time, whether that's getting after those contracts as we build and invest in our infrastructure, or manufacturing and R&D, as we know that our innovative startups play a key role in coming up with new products and services for the future. So we want to make sure that all of those small businesses, from Main Street to industrial centers to innovation centers, have that capital, affordable capital that they need, as well as the technical assistance, the networks, the know-how to run their businesses.
I want to get to the contracting, but first I want to ask you particularly about private capital, just because when we look at what's going on in the regional banking system right now, certainly I was just reading a note yesterday about how well capitalized a lot of banking, these regional banks are, but how many of them also say they're tightening up credit. And we know when credit gets tightened up, particularly if you're a business owner of color or a female business owner, that's also a little harder. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
Most definitely. I mean, that's been my top concern throughout this challenging time from the beginning with SVB Bank. The small businesses were already facing tightening credit standards, and obviously they've been really challenged over the past couple of years, potentially taking on more debt with either the debt relief that we had through the COVID EIDL program, hopefully paying down a lot of it and being able to sustain with great programs like the Paycheck Protection Program and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and others. But tightening credit is not good for small businesses or startups and the potential growth and competition in our marketplace. I think that's one of the big things in saving small businesses during the pandemic is that we needed to defend competition. Small businesses are the competition. But the SBA's programs become increasingly important as a result. As banks face liquidity challenges and are not able to lend at the same rates, having a government guaranteed program is beneficial to them on their bottom line. And so we want to make sure that our programs work well for not only the small businesses, but the lending institutions that we support. And that's exactly what we've been focused on, taking this time to leverage the large scale that SBA achieved during pandemic relief, the technology investments that we've made to ensure that we're cutting red tape and streamlining our products and expanding the distribution network, meaning increasing competition amongst our lenders to ensure that we can attract as many lenders as participated in PPP as an example. So that's the hard work that we're doing now to ensure that our programs work in today's environment.
And you also have a proposal for fintech firms to begin to underwrite 7A loans, a potential game changer in the lending landscape. How much are you noticing a change in lending practices when it comes to sort of alternative lenders or newer lenders?
Well, what we know is that for the past 5 years, we've seen a decline in small dollar loans. It's challenging and expensive to underwrite a loan, and a small dollar loan versus a large dollar loan is preferred then as a result, especially with complex regulation, which we're focused on simplifying in our proposed rules currently. But with the small business licensing companies that you're referring to, this is a program not just targeted to fintech, but all alternative lenders. It's a 4-decade-long program that has existed at the SBA. We currently only have 14 licenses. There was a moratorium put in place, and with our lifting of that moratorium, we hope to expand the distribution network and get more good lenders in there who are doing small dollar loans and filling the gaps in the marketplace, the loans that the banks are just not doing as much in our portfolio, those small dollar loans. So we've seen average loan size, 7x over the last few years, 7 years. And so we want to make sure we reverse that and get to those small dollar loans.
How much concern is there as you think about lending practices or the work the SBA does with fraud? In particular, I know that a little bit later in the hour, Senator Ernst is going to be joining us, and she's voiced significant concern about making sure that we have proper procedures in place and are really rooting out fraud when it comes to SBA lending. What is the SBA doing on that front?
Yeah, and the conversation of fraud really started with the relief programs, which were unique products, not typical of our 7A or 504 loan products. So the agency has not faced rampant fraud in its programs in its 70-year history. And so this is a result of the large scale, the rush to speed without certainty. And so I think that what's important to note is that the Biden-Harris administration came in. We wanted to make sure that we targeted and supported the smallest of the small businesses, and that the taxpayer dollars were protected from fraud, waste, or abuse. And so there was a choice to be made, basically. Do we continue as is with the current practices, or try to pivot to make sure that we were protecting those dollars and getting them out to the businesses it was intended to serve? We implemented strong controls to ensure that we could reverse some of the trends. The agency has always been able to collect tax returns, for example, when it does disaster lending. And that was not the case on the COVID EIDL program. And so, as mandated by Congress until right before 2021. So we needed to implement those controls, making that choice to strengthen fraud protection at the agency and ensure that we had a strong risk management framework as recommended by the GAO. That's what we focused on. That way we could ensure that our scalability in the future could be maintained. We need to scale to better help more of our small businesses, especially with small dollar loans. And so positioning the agency by investing in the technologies required to flag fraud and go after and investigate fraud was something that was prioritized by the Biden administration. And in fact, in the president's budget, we've asked for additional funding for our Inspector General to go after fraud that the SBA flags and identifies in the system.
How much more additional funding do you think you need?
Well, of course, the PPP and COVID EIDL were at scale, over 11 million loans in that PPP program and nearly 4 million in the COVID EIDL program, a big chunk of which was also without controls in 2020. So clearly there's a lot of work for the IG. I don't think any dollar amount is going to be enough. He needs to have the ability to continue to pursue these, which is also why the president extended the statute of limitations so that the IG could continue to go after that. But I think that knowing that the SBA has implemented the fraud risk framework that was recommended. It's a stronger agency as a result of that scale, but also the hard work that was put in by the SBA to ensure that we're positioned for any growth in the future.
So let's talk a little bit about federal contracting. I know that $60 billion of the infrastructure bill from last fall was earmarked for critical infrastructure. When we think about the number of small businesses that received federal contracts, I know in fiscal 2021, that was down almost 40% over the past decade in terms of small businesses. How much of that do you attribute to systemic problems, like whether we're talking about systemic inequities or red tape, or maybe that's a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of everything. So we have an all whole of government approach to trying to battle this. We've seen a 40% decline in small business contractors, but also a 60% decline in new entrants. So it's both the front end, making sure that they're certified, that they have the knowledge and the capital to be able to pursue contracts, but also systemic issues with how the government buys its products and services. And I think leaning into how we source strategically and have these larger schedules with large contracts that small businesses have a harder time competing on is the challenge. And so agencies have been working hard to achieve the president's goals around expanded use of small businesses by breaking down some of those contracts, debundling them. We also made a huge shift in category management, which is the way the government strategically sources its contracts, to incentivize leveraging our socioeconomic firms in our procurement. We need all of our great entrepreneurs and to be able to provide the products and services that the government needs to procure. And so ensuring that small businesses are not only prepared to compete for contracts, but that they can actually win and deliver against those contracts as well.
How are you helping them be more prepared? How are you getting the word out about that?
Well, the SBA obviously has invested heavily over the years in its network of centers. We now have over 1,600, thanks to the expansion during the American Rescue Plan with the Community Navigator programs. And many of our centers have been leaning into government contracting. We now have a partnership where our small business development centers partner with Department of Defense's procurement centers, and now called Apex accelerators, to help train small businesses on government contracting, ensure that they're ready to bid, ready to build their back office to sustain compliance requirements and perform against that contract. But in addition to just knowing the ins and outs of how to bid and win contracts, it's the capital as well. And we've been focused on making sure that our capital programs are robust and that they meet businesses where they are today, how they're organized, how they're structured, so that they can get the funding that they need, that working capital, to be able to deliver against a contract.
So out of all of those things you said, whether it's sort of knowing how to bid for a contract or the capital, what are you seeing among small businesses in terms of a need? Like, which one of those do you think is the biggest challenge?
Well, perhaps because I'm the SBA administrator known for getting capital into hands of businesses, I hear number one concern is always capital. But of course, I think that a lot of businesses, especially those potential new entrants, are just confused by the process. And so they really do need somebody to walk them through. We provide grant funding support to a network of advisors that can help our small businesses get contract ready, not only through our center network, but we have specialized government contracting grants to get our socioeconomic firms ready. But in addition to that, we really believe that expanding a network and making people aware of SBA's core services at our district offices and at headquarters is really important. So, for example, the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce within the Community Navigator program has focused on contracting in particular, getting Black businesses contract ready, because we see great disparity. Less than 2% of contracts go to Black firms, they're about 10% of businesses. And so we want to make sure that we reverse that disparity across all of our socioeconomic groups and ensure that they know how to get those contracts. And so, that really puts a big onus on our district offices that have business opportunity specialists that work directly with businesses to connect them to contract opportunities.
So how important, when we think about reauthorization of the SBA, which hasn't happened, I think, comprehensively in 23 years, how important is modernizing that framework for you all?
Well, just to be clear, while the SBA as a whole has not been reauthorized, it's important to note that the agency has evolved tremendously over the past 2 decades. We have multiple new programs responding to the times, including growth accelerators for innovative startups, as an example, our state trade export promotion program to ensure that small businesses are exporting, our SBA Express product, a lending product that is preferred by banks in many instances because it's a product that's simpler to access and use. So the agency has evolved tremendously, not to mention the scaling to 1.2 trillion and the types of systems and processes we put in place as a result. But clearly, we are working in close contact with our congressional partners to ensure that we can continue to modernize the SBA. I think we've asked our small businesses to pivot and adapt over these past few years in order to survive, and I've challenged the agency to be as entrepreneurial as the small businesses we serve and continually evolve, which we've had to do.
We're almost out of time, but I just wanted to quickly ask you about your father, who has run a series of veterinary hospitals. And it was interesting for me to learn he did his training at the Tuskegee University in Alabama. And I just wanted to ask sort of what lessons he's imparted to you from that time, particularly working with going to school with African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, so my family's from Texas. There's my father's 7th generation Texan. But for vet school, he went to Tuskegee Institute to get his degree. And that was just a real pivotal time, late 60s, that he was there. And it was a very different experience of having been in Texas. He grew up in an environment where, he was hit when he was a child for speaking Spanish, as was my mother, which is why my Spanish is challenged today. But it's, to be able to learn this nonviolent approach as well, which was, popular amongst his classmates, and experience, the world from the perspective of the African Americans who were, trying to fight for civil rights for us all. I think it was really transformative. And he chose to go back to California and pursue his American dream of business ownership and start his chain of veterinary hospitals. But obviously, it was really formative. My father has been through, so much in his life, really starving as a student, but struggling hard to stay in school and continue to, build his wealth for his family and prosperity for not only himself, but the community he serves and the employees that he has in his hospitals.
Well, I wish we had more time, but we are out of time. SBA Administrator Isabella Casillas Guzman, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Introducing our View from the Top moderator and founder of Storyline, Chris Frakes.
Hey, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to introduce our View from the Top segment this morning. But first, I want to thank our sponsor for making it all possible, Intuit QuickBooks. And now I'd like to introduce to the stage our next guest. Sasan Goodarzi is the CEO of Intuit, and Dr. Ufuk Akçiğ. He's a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. Gentlemen, welcome to the View from the Top. So thank you guys for doing this. I'm excited to have you. And Sasan, I want to start with you because I think Intuit has this fantastic new Intuit QuickBooks Small Business Index that they've introduced. And I wondered, what insights are you getting about how entrepreneurs and small businesses are dealing with the really tough economic challenges we're seeing? Inflation, labor shortages, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I think it's impacting everybody around the world. But there's three things I would say. One, for us, it's always a reminder that small businesses are true survivors. They truly focus on how to reinvent themselves, how to reinvent the business that they're in, and they're fighters. And so what we have seen from when COVID took place in 2020 and what we're continuing to see is just that. I would say the second thing is there's a much more sort of aggressive approach to digitizing their whole business. And for small businesses, digitizing simply means I need to be able to manage my cash flow. I need to manage my money in, my money out, so that I can be just effective in running my business. I would say the third thing, it depends by industry and by state, but what we're actually seeing is a far easier time to hire versus several years ago where there's such a hot job market that the big enterprises were hiring over the small businesses, but now we see a lot of small businesses, depending on the sector, finding it a much easier time to hire. And that's actually what the index tells us.
That's fascinating. And Professor Axios, I want to go to you now because you're partnering with Intuit to produce the index. And I wonder, how does it give us insight into the small business economy as a whole? We heard a little bit about the challenges, but what are we seeing for small businesses overall?
Sure. So small businesses are an essential part of the economy. Indeed, when you look at the overall distribution, 80% of all the businesses in the US have at most 9 workers. And when you look at the youngest firms, less than 5-year-old firms, that number goes up to 93%. So it's a really essential part of the economy. But ironically, despite their importance, they are not covered very well in official statistics. The official statistics that cover the universe of firms is coming with 7 to 9 month lag. And the more recent data sets, they are typically not covering the small business, but they're covering the large businesses. But small businesses are just like our children in the family. They are more vulnerable, but they're also our future. So that's why we have to be really, really mindful and careful about them. So that's exactly where the importance of the Intuit QuickBooks Small Business Index comes in. We go back historically, and so before the 7-month period, we benchmark the Intuit QuickBooks data against the official statistics, and then now we are using that benchmarking and using the flow of Intuit QuickBooks data to represent what happens to small businesses in the US.
So it sounds
near
like,
real time.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a much more contemporaneous reporting of the data. And I wonder, when you look at that then, and you don't have that lag, what can policymakers take away from that to make better decisions? How might they use the index since it is so much more real time than what we're used to?
Policymakers are leading the economy with their decisions, and obviously they want to know the impact of their decisions, but they need to see what happens to the economy upon their decisions. So that's why this data set will be very helpful for them to monitor what happens. Especially the strength of the index is that it's also broken down by sector and region. So that way, because some policies are at the regional level, sectoral level, and one can monitor the impact of the economy, the impact of the policy on the economy by following the index.
So Sasan, I want to get your take on that a little bit because I wonder, what should Washington policymakers know about small businesses as they try to navigate really challenging headwinds right now? I mean, it's a very uncertain economy. As a small business owner myself, we see it every day. I wonder, kind of, what advice would you have for those trying to steer the ship?
Well, a couple of things I'll say. One, beyond all the time I spend with small businesses, I'm an immigrant and come from a family that survived by starting a small business. And I would say 3 things are essential in sort of our dream at Intuit, because small businesses drive half of the global economy, more than half of the hiring around the world. So as the professor just stated, small businesses are the lifeline of the economy. One is just streamlining regulations from what it takes to start a business, what it takes to get a business up and running, being customer back and not agency forward, meaning that every agency may have a rule of what you need, what kind of licensing you did, et cetera. Having one place where it makes it very streamlined and almost no barriers to start a small business and to start, in the US at least, your American dream. The second is I would love for us to incentivize digitization. Yeah. And again, digitization to a small business simply means managing cash flow. But to be able to manage your cash flow on a digital platform and be incentivized for it actually helps your survival rate, since 50% of small businesses go out of business after 5 years. That's a significant number. And I would just lastly say making it easier to access loans when needed. Now, you need a lot of data to make sure that the small business can pay it back, but I think streamlining access to money, digitization, and frictionless regulations can really help a small business thrive, and that's what we would love to see sort of a government advocate for, and make policymakers make decisions that will make it easier for small businesses to thrive and grow.
And I wonder, why did you decide to launch the index? Why did you decide to partner with Professor Axios? What was the thinking there? What were you trying to provide?
I think the professor really said it well, and I'll just amplify a couple of points that were made. When you start with the notion that small businesses drive 50% plus of the global economy and more than 50% of the hiring around the world, you have to start with, well, do we actually know what's happening with small businesses? And the answer is no, we really don't. And this index really provides very near-time perspective in terms of how's the performance of the small businesses by sector, by state, and of course we're doing this in Canada and the UK as well. And that helps policymakers with what decisions can we make to help small businesses, because they are the lifeline of our economy. But then when we make a decision, what actually happened? And I think that's the real power. And with this index, this is just the start of, we're starting with, jobs and payroll, but over time, there's a lot of other things we want to expose so you can actually understand payments flow, late payments, and what are the implications, and therefore what choices you can make as a policymaker.
And we have just a few minutes left, but Professor Axios, I want to go with you because I think as a small business myself, I would love, since we have two very smart guys up here, I would like some...
Just one.
I'd like some advice from you on just kind of where you think this economy is going for small businesses, and what advice do you have for small businesses as they try to navigate a lot of the data? Because for you and for many policymakers, it's data, it's big trends. But for those of us on the ground, it's like a day-to-day up and down.
Right. I can take a longer perspective on this. Indeed, when we look at the US economy, small businesses were on a decline since 2000, even though they are really the most important part of the economy. You need to have fresh blood in the economy, and you need to have the creative destruction. And even the superstar firms, today's superstar firms, were some small businesses at some point. So that's why saving or making sure that they are healthy means that not only the economy will be healthy today, but tomorrow's superstars will be protected and they will be nurtured. So that's why I think for policymakers, keeping an eye on small businesses is very essential. And when it comes to small businesses, data is key. They need to keep a good track of their own data, but they need to also make sure how they are performing relative to the rest of the firms in the economy. So that's why through this index, they can also benchmark themselves, or at least compare themselves to similar firms in their sector and in their region, because the index will give this information to small businesses, and they can compare their success or failure relative to the rest of the economy.
Susan, what advice would you give to small businesses trying to navigate this pretty difficult environment?
I was talking to a small business this weekend that we were just talking about what can I learn from his business. He's a videographer of sports, and what advice that I have. The advice I gave him is focus on your most important customers, nurture them and grow them, and focus on your cash flow. And although that sounds so obvious, particularly the cash flow, he found very insightful to really understand how much money is going out, how much money is going in, and how does he ensure that he's got enough cash flow. So that's the biggest advice. It's down to earth, but customers and money.
I think that's great advice, and we have to leave it there. I thank you both so much for your insights today. Thank you for joining Axios.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
And now please welcome Axios local DC reporter, Paige Hopkins.
Good morning. Excited to be here with you all for my Axios Events debut. Before I welcome our next guest, I would love to invite you all to subscribe to Axios Local. Our DC newsletter covers local business, restaurants, everything in between, and we would love for you to subscribe. And if you're not in the DC area, we have over 24 Axios Local newsletters covering cities that you very well may be interested in. So with that, I am honored to introduce our next guest, a local small business owner, the founder of Busboys and Poets, Andy Shalal. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my debut as well.
Oh, well, amazing. We're both first timers. It'll be fine. We were talking backstage about how we've chatted a couple times on the phone, but never face to face. So in the pandemic landscape, it's so exciting to be able to have human interaction. So thank you, doubly, for being here. With that, obviously, the pandemic has presented major challenges for small businesses. I feel like that's an understatement. So how have you had to pivot and adjust your businesses to handle the challenges of the last few years?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. I think, like all challenges, it opens up opportunities and really gave us a moment to be able to retool, rethink, sort of shape our business, become much more efficient because we had to. Before the pandemic, things were flying very high and very fast. And I think for a lot of us, there was no end in sight. It seemed like that was going to be forever. And I think it gave us a pause that I think was useful in many ways and helped us to kind of reinvent our business.
Interesting. And what are some of those reinventions look like? I know for restaurants, sometimes it meant more of a focus on takeout business. What were the examples that you had?
Well, we were fortunate in that we already had a pretty robust takeout, platforms that we've used. So we continue to use them and continue to expand them and look for other ways to be able to tap into the business that we didn't have inside the place. I think it gave us also an opportunity to speak to our staff and find out who are those people that are looking to advance further into the industry and who are the people that are just there for a short period of time. And it gave us really an opportunity to advance those people pretty quickly because, what happened is in the past, it used to be like a dishwasher would come in. They stay as a dishwasher for many years. Mm-hmm. Now you can go from dishwasher to sous chef within 2 years. So opportunities were opened up like crazy, really, in the restaurant industry.
And you talked about your staff. We were inundated throughout the early phases of the pandemic specifically with videos of customers just behaving badly towards service workers. I wonder if you experienced that at Busboys and Poets, and regardless, how do you keep morale up among employees during such a difficult time?
Well, COVID gave us a huge challenge, obviously, and then we were moving forward in 2021, and then I think when Omicron came, that was really worse for us, certainly. And I know I've talked to a lot of businesses that felt the same way because we were retooling and reshaping and thinking this is over. And then all of a sudden you hit this wall. And it created a lot more challenges and morale really dropped in a big way. We lost many of our staff because of fear, uncertainty, all of that stuff that was happening. And we're just really beginning to come back out of it. I mean, it's... What happened is during COVID, a lot of the people that were pretty much at the top of the food chain and the restaurant industry found other alternative jobs. They left the industry because it was so scary to work in customer service and face to face. And so you ended up, everybody at the bottom rose, and then you end up with this gap at the bottom. And so that gap has not been completely filled. And so we are still in the process of getting that. And I suspect probably another 6 months to a year before the base gets solidified again. So you have this constant, growth within the business and within the workforce.
Sure. Something I think people really appreciate about Busboys and Poets is the prioritization of diversity and uplifting marginalized voices. But we're in such a politicized time where even acknowledging our differences can be divisive, can be politicized. How have you continued to prioritize diversity in this climate?
Well, we are it's part of our mission. We are a place where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted. And we are a place where art and culture and politics comes together and intentionally collides. We are a place where people can come and take that deliberate pause and feed their mind, body, and soul. So we are a place that's already, this stuff is baked in. It wasn't like all of a sudden we discovered DEI and started going in that direction. Our top management team is very diverse. Our entire staff is extremely diverse. So it's already been embedded into our mission right from the get-go. So, for a lot of businesses, I think they had to sort of wake up one day and say, "Oh my God, we need to have a black person, in the team," and so on. So they had to rehire. But what happened is when you do that, the culture within the organization isn't a good fit, and therefore you end up with a constant, revolving door, people coming in and out all the time and people can't figure out, like, we hired a black person, but they left within 3 months. Well, the culture within the organization wasn't set up to open up the opportunity for such a person. Ours, I think, has been that way since day one, and so it really hasn't been a huge challenge for us in that way.
Culture is something we talk about at Axios a lot. How do you create and maintain a positive work culture environment?
Well, it has to start at the top. It can't be a thing you give to HR to take care of, and then everything else stays the same. So I think starting at the top and really with the focus, for every group of cohorts that come into work, especially management and people that are going to be interacting with a lot of people, I do orientations, and my orientations are around race, around culture. They're not about, service and stuff like that. Other people do that, but I have to really focus on maintaining that culture. And I think if it doesn't come from the top, if they don't hear it from the CEO or the founder, I don't think it really resonates as well. It becomes just a thing you check off, and that feels inauthentic, and people recognize it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something that everyone may not know is that Busboys and Poets has kind of a lot of businesses within it. I mean, the restaurant, the event space, creative space, bookstore. I'm sure there are challenges presented with having those different businesses, but also maybe some benefits. Can you talk more about what it's like to manage them all?
It's not easy. We do have a lot of businesses within one, exactly. And I think, all of them are important to the end result. I remember when I first went out to look for a loan for my business, I went to multiple banks, and one of the banks I went in, the first one, I said, well, I want to have a business that has free Wi-Fi, coffee, large couches, and books. And they said, good luck, we'll see you later. So I ended up having to go to 3 or 4 businesses before I finally got, Industrial Bank, which is one of the oldest black-owned banks here in the city, was the bank that ended up, putting their money behind my back. And of course, once you open and success is right there, banks start knocking your door down, telling you they want to give you money. They're like throwing money at you.
Yeah, well, that's a good problem to have. Sure.
That's true, but you have to pay it back.
There's a catch. So we talked about the early days of Busboys and Poets. As we look ahead, another thing Axios loves to do is ask what's next. So are there any exciting expansions or any new things you can tell us coming?
Well, I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about new things because they're still in the formative stages. But what we have done is, I think, like what happened with COVID and that sort of pause, in a sense, really helped us to solidify our base and make sure that our training is up to par, make sure our staff is happy, make sure that we provide a great work environment. All of those things, I think, have become at the top of our agenda. I mean, they've always been important, but they've become more important. As you know, I mean, it's no secret that it's hard to find people, especially in the service industry. Sure. So we've been really focused on making sure that the people we have are taken care of so that we can move to the next level. I think one of the challenges with businesses, I guess all businesses, and the restaurant business is no exception, is the uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what interest rates are going to be. We don't know where the workforce is going to go. And I think with that, we have to, I'm being a little more cautious than I would normally be, but we are looking to expand in the metropolitan area. We've had a lot of interest in other markets, LA, New York, Newark, New Jersey, Minneapolis, Minnesota, all of those places, but we really have not gone there yet because of the uncertainty. I want to see things stabilizing economically before I start taking the foray into much wider markets.
Sure. That sets me up well for the next question, kind of bringing it back to local DC. As you well know, Initiative 82 recently passed, which will create big changes for how tipped workers get paid. Instead of, making about $5 or $6 an hour and supplementing the rest with tips, workers will have to make that full minimum wage. And so I wonder how you're pivoting at Busboys and Poets to prepare for that, and what you think the bigger picture impact that Initiative 82 will have on the industry.
We've been pushing for that for a long time. I think tipping is a relic of the past. And I think as much as people like to have control, in a sense, we don't tip a clerk at a CVS. We don't tip our dentist. We don't tip our, any kind of other type of workers. But for whatever reason, restaurant workers have always been paid a sub-minimum wage, and the tips make up for it, where basically the customers become the employers of the individual that's working there. I do think that it's time for that to go away, because it's unfair for somebody to be there working and depending on a customer's whim whether or not they can make a living. And that being said, sometimes people want to have control over service and the quality of service that they get, but that can be done in different ways. There are people that shouldn't be in the restaurant industry, that shouldn't be in the service industry, frankly, that they don't have the temperament for it. And those people shouldn't continue working in that industry. I want to be able to professionalize the industry more, have people that are focused on service and love service, and make service a career, because it is a career. It's a great opportunity for, I think, a lot of people that may not have, college degrees or graduate degrees or whatever. So I think by taking away that, I think it puts the industry on par with other industries that are professional, and rather than being a transient kind of business right now where people come and go all the time, and you do this kind of on a part-time basis on the side. Not that that's a bad thing, but I want to be able to professionalize the business. I think Initiative 82 and initiatives like that put the restaurant industry on par with other industries helps to promote that.
Do you worry at all that with the passage of Initiative 82, restaurant owners increasing menu prices, adding service charges, that'll lead to less tips and therefore workers making less, at least to start?
I mean, there are many states that already have that situation where tip workers make the same amount as everybody else as far as their minimum wage. That has not been seen. That hasn't happened. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think tipping is embedded in our culture, fortunately or unfortunately, and I don't think that's going to go away. People don't think like, oh, this person's making enough money, therefore I'm not going to tip them. I think most people tip, and ironically, people tip now whether service is good or bad. I think for most people, it's first of all, they don't want to be seen on some sort of TikTok that they didn't tip, because that looks really ugly, and it's hard to fight that. But on the other hand, also people recognize that this person is not making enough, so I need to be able to pay them. At the same time, I think people really do appreciate the fact that there are people out there serving them and are willing to put a premium on that.
You make a good point. Nobody wants to go viral on TikTok for the wrong reasons these days.
It's really ugly.
We just have a couple of more minutes, so I'll end with a couple fun ones. This is something that we posed to some of our audience members today, so I'll ask you as well. Other than your own, what are some of your favorite local small businesses?
What about some of my favorite?
Local small businesses.
Local small business. I like to go to Perry's, which is near where I live in Adams Morgan. It's kind of a fusion food, but they have really good sushi. I like to go to Lapis, but my favorite is to eat at home.
Okay.
Yeah,
You cook?
Well, I do cook, but when you're out, it's really funny. When you're in the restaurant business, eating out is not as much fun as you think it is, because because, you know, for a lot of people, eating out is really like a relaxing thing. For me, eating out is a lot of pressure. If I could tell you just one quick story,
Yeah.
if I may, I used to go to New York to check out places, you know, kind of see what's going on. Now New York comes here to check us out. But anyway, but I used to go there, and I was there one time, and we were, you know, we go from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant kind of all day long. And I was at this lunch spot, you know, and the lunch hadn't quite started. It was a very small place, but it hadn't started. And it looked like the owner was the only person working. I mean, I'm sure they had a cook, but it was the only person working in the front of the house, and she was struggling, and she was seating people, and she was going back and getting a drink, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm sitting here near on a booth watching the front door, and people are starting to pile up at the door, and they're kind of whispering to each other, like, who's going to seat? I said, I can't take this anymore. So I got up, and I started seating people. And she's looking like, who is this guy? You know, some angel from heaven. So I walked up to her, I said, look, I'm in the restaurant business, and I know how to do this. Let me seat people, and you go ahead and take care of everything else. So this way, and I can kind of check on them. And she looked at me for a second, and out of desperation, she said, okay. And I ended up working the entire lunch shift and had a fantastic time. I learned how to get water for them. I learned how to get the sodas, everything else that was. And it was just a great experience. At the end, she really like thanked me. We had a great lunch, and she bought lunch for me. Ta-da.
Well, I thank you too, and I hope you don't have to work at too many restaurants outside of
I
your
love
own
working at
moving
restaurants.
forward.
I love working. I love serving. I love working in restaurants.
Well, Andy, I would love to chat much, much longer, but that is our time. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
joining
Paige.
us today.
Thank you all
for being here.
Thank you so much.
Hi, it's me again, host of Axios Today, Nyla Boodoo.
Hello again. I'm so excited to welcome back our final guest for this morning. She's ranking member of the Senate Small Business Committee and has a position in Senate leadership as chair of the Republican Policy Committee. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. Senator, good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
So I just wanted to start by asking sort of for you to give us a sense of how small businesses are faring in Iowa at this moment, as we have just spent this morning talking just about, before we get into sort of all the regulatory stuff, I know you were just telling me that you were in Des Moines this past weekend. What are people telling you about how they're feeling about the economy, how they're feeling about running their businesses?
Yeah, you bet, Nyla. It's wonderful. I love being in Iowa, and every year I do basically a river-to-river tour where I visit all of our 99 counties every year. And as a part of my Small Business Committee this year, we are awarding Small Business of the Week in every one of our 99 counties. So I do get to hear from those small business owners, those incredible leaders all the time. And what I hear right now, there are a couple of issues that are concerning. One is inflation. And I know that all of our small businesses are really feeling that crush of inflation right now. And I also hear a lot about overregulation. There are a lot of small businesses that can't seem to keep up with the regulation that the federal government throws at them all the time, and they don't have the expertise in certain areas to manage those regulations. So they're feeling the crush from all angles, and somehow we've got to find out how to relieve that pressure on them.
And so overregulation, is there anything in particular that people named as being a really difficult pain point?
Well, in Iowa specifically, one of the regulations they've been very concerned about is the Waters of the U.S. regulation. This impacts so many of our small businesses, and nationwide it would affect over 4.3 small businesses. And WOTUS, because of the permitting process that those individuals would have to go through, it hits in 3 of our largest sectors. So agriculture, most certainly it hits agriculture. It hits manufacturing and construction. And you think about those industries, that's everywhere. Construction, manufacturing, ag is even located in all of our states. So these are the areas we worry about. WOTUS is extremely concerning to a lot of them, yes.
I was just talking to Administrator Guzman about the systemic problems within not just our lending system, but different things that we are doing in terms of the SBA is doing in terms of the regulatory framework. Given how much the number of small businesses applying for federal contracting has gone down over the past few years, what is your biggest concern when it comes to federal contracting in small businesses?
Well, there is a concern there, and this I do hear from a lot of small businesses as well. One small business in Iowa in particular, a woman-owned small business, she was struggling to access and get through all the forms and the requirements just to access federal contracting. So she had started, given up many times trying to access those programs. So that was very difficult for her. But if you look at lending programs overall, there are a couple of issues that we see coming up. And Senator Cardin and I, who is the chairman of Small Business Committee, we have worked together on this. We've sent a letter to the administration. But one, really the loosening of the underwriting rules for some of the small business programs. This is a rule that SBA has just recently put out. We are very concerned about loosening of regulations and those people that may engage in loans that may not be able to repay them. And then the overwhelming advent of fintech as it's coming into SBA as well. We have a lot of concerns there. With unlimited amounts of fintech coming into SBA. And what we saw during COVID through the SBA programs like Paycheck Protection Program, most of the fraud that we saw through the Paycheck Protection Program was through fintechs. So there's a lot of issues that we have with the various loan programs. We really need to make sure that whatever we're doing with these loan type programs, that we have really intense scrutiny of what's going on and making sure that those dollars are going to truly small business, just not a large entity or a large number of dollars going to bigger businesses. Really does need to be focused on small business.
So Administrator Guzman did say that the Biden administration, or that they are also asking for more funding for the Inspector General in the next budget. Is that something you would support then?
It would definitely be something that I would look at. I think that it is important that we have that oversight and making sure that the businesses that are qualified are the ones that are getting the dollars and that we're eliminating as much fraud as possible in those programs.
And of course, I think fraud is something that, as you're saying, is such an important thing. How do you balance fraud with not overregulation? Because I also hear you saying that's a concern, right? So where is the balance there?
Right, and that's why you do have to have great banks that are engaging in these discussions and credit unions and making sure that we are following those rules, because they can be great players through some of these loan type programs, because they are the ones that will scrutinize initially and make sure that there are good investments out there. And so if there is more pressure on some of those outside entities to do their job, then we can also do our job. So I think there is a good balance that exists out there. We just have to find the right point.
Do you think the Senate is applying enough pressure to the banking system now to ensure that that's happening?
I don't know that we are. And there is a little bit of resistance out there, and we've heard of going back and scrutinizing some of the fraud that existed during the Paycheck Protection Program and just forgiving a lot of loans that are under a certain dollar amount, just letting it go. even if you suspect that there's fraud there, I still think that we need to go after those fraudsters that have engaged in the programs. They need to pay that back. Those dollars really are to go for those that qualified for the programs. So again, we have to find the right balance.
When we're looking at the current banking environment, and we're thinking particularly about regional banks and how much it's probably a natural reflection of the current situation that credit tightens up. Are you concerned about, as banks are tightening sort of looking at their balance sheets and tightening up access to credit, that will particularly affect small business owners?
It very well could. It could. And we know how important those regional banks, those community banks are in the rural areas. That's where we access our loans in rural Iowa. We have to have those partners. So again, just working with those banks and helping them where we can is very important. It doesn't help when we have other entities like we've seen with Silicon Valley Bank that engage in very risky behavior, maybe don't have the oversight of the regulators like they should. Then it does make others be a little more concerned about, oh, how are we doing our banking practices? What are the stress tests there? So again, we have to go back and make sure that banks are doing their job and not engaging in the risky type behavior we saw with SVB. We also need to make sure those regulators are doing their job. But it does affect those community and regional bankers.
Do you think that SVB, there was a lack of regulatory oversight involved with SVB?
We are still trying to gather the information on that, but that's what a lot of the information that I have seen is leading to, is that maybe there was a lack of oversight from regulators. And it's something we're going to have to really do a deep dive into, whether it's the House, the Senate, but making sure that the regulators are doing their job. There's a lot of investors that were left hanging. So we want to make sure that that's not happening in the future.
I want to switch gears and talk about something completely different, but which I know is really important to small businesses. One of my Axios colleagues in Minneapolis just wrote about how the Hormel plant created its own daycare center for its workers just because it was such a problem to find daycare. How do you think, this is such a huge problem for small businesses. What's your advice, or what are you hearing and thinking about for small businesses when it comes to problems like just daycare, whether it's for their own employees or for themselves?
I love that. And this actually is one of my priorities as we move into this new Congress on the Small Business Committee, because childcare is so important, especially following COVID, when many women exited the workforce because traditionally they are the providers for their children, the daycare providers. They're staying at home with their children while maybe the other spouse went back to work or stayed at work. And if we want those women to re-engage in the workforce, we have to know that there's childcare available for them. So I love to hear about those businesses that are taking matters into their own hands and really focusing on getting whatever parent it is that has been at home watching the children, engaging them in the workforce again by providing those daycare facilities. I know that there are other businesses that will partner with many entities in a community and maybe pay for slots at daycares to make sure that the children of those employees have somewhere to go. There's a lot of creativity that we can find in this area. One of the initiatives that I have been working on with Senator Jackie Rosen, who is also on the Small Business Committee, is allowing nonprofit entities to apply for SBA loans to start or further develop childcare centers. And that's really important because nonprofits right now don't have access to those loans. And if you come to the rural areas like in Iowa, Many of those nonprofits are actually religious organizations that don't have access to SBA. So by allowing those nonprofits to come into this space, we have great opportunity to close up some of these childcare deserts. So I think it's incredibly important if we want to see a fully engaged workforce, know that there's a safe space for those children to go to. We have to engage as a small business committee.
Are there also other things you think Congress should be doing to, in terms of when it comes to childcare across the country, federal policies that should be enacted?
I think there are policies that we can look at and again, make sure there's not over-regulation. We need safe spaces for our children. But again, going back to some of the regulatory processes, a lot of small businesses, especially when I talk to child cares across Iowa, there are so many regulations that it really inhibits their ability to engage in this space with federal programs. It's overburdensome for many of them. And we need to make it easier, simplify the processes, allow them to engage in this space.
You mentioned Senator Cardin, the chair of the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. He, in December, introduced a comprehensive reauthorization of the SBA. What, to your mind, are the most important parts of that bill?
Yeah, I think, one, reauthorization, bottom line, is important. I think the last time that the SBA was reauthorized was over 2 decades ago. Small business has changed a lot since then. So Senator Cardin and I sat down, we talked about this, and it is extremely important to move ahead with reauthorization. It may be a heavy lift, but we're willing to do it. So again, taking a look at regulation and making sure that as we're rewriting or modernizing the SBA, that we are truly focusing on small business. Going back to the fact that we have many larger businesses that are accessing larger amounts of dollars within those
Where is that line for you?
programs.
So what is a small
Yeah, and that's what we have to discuss because, again, things have changed so significantly in the last 2 decades. So some would say it's a small business is 50 employees or under, but you talk to some other folks and they're like, oh my gosh, that's too small. But, you know, where I come from, a small business might be 2 or 3 people. So there are some pretty big discrepancies here, but maybe on a sliding scale, you know, allowing certain businesses to access certain dollars in proportion, but focusing on small business. And we have to figure out what is the traditional language today of what a small business is. So reauthorizing, looking at regulation, and making sure that the regulation is right-sized for small businesses will be very important in the modernization. And then also, as we discussed, okay, the types of entities that are doing the loans, a second look at some of those fintechs would be very important. Part of the reauthorization, again, childcare will be important to me. I've mentioned that to Senator Cardin. And then just making sure that we're not overburdening and that we can simplify the processes in really engaging in small business.
We're almost out of time. We like to end with one fun thing at Axios.
Okay.
And I feel like you, as a senator, have probably patronized a lot of small businesses. I think you're eating in a lot of places. I know this is like asking you to name your favorite child, but can you just
Thank
share
God
with us?
I only have one. Yeah.
Okay, so then this should be easy. I was just wondering about a small business you visited recently that made an impression on you.
Oh my gosh, I have visited so many small businesses, and I do focus on this when I'm doing, and 99, visits every year, and it's so great. But I heard you talking about food earlier, and there's so much good food across Iowa. If you want to, just come on out, folks. Iowa is great. So Beebeetown, which is not too far from me, it's an hour or so by motorcycle, if you want to ride your motorcycle. So Beebeetown is home to the Twisted Tail, and it was the best burger in Iowa in 2020 or 2021. Delicious. It is rural. Great stopover for folks that are on motorcycles. And then we've got a lot of great breweries in Iowa too. And I've had so much fun visiting there, obviously, if you go have a beer or, you know, an ale.
Beer and a burger.
And a burger. Come on out. Fishback in Stevenson has a great ale. It's called Cherry Poppins. You definitely have to have it. It's really good.
I feel like you need to write something for Axios.
Oh my gosh, I would love to. Seriously, food in Iowa. But overall, if you really want good food on a stick, come to the Iowa State Fair.
As always, yes.
On a stick.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining our State of Play for Small Business. And before you all go, don't forget, you can also check out my podcast, Axios Today. Start your morning with the news that matters. We publish at 5:30 Eastern Time every morning for all you early Washington risers. Thanks to all of you who joined us, both in the room and on the live stream this morning. Until next time, thanks for watching Axios Events.
Thank you. Thank you.